Muhammad Morsi, the president who was authorized after the victory of the Muslim Brothers in the elections of 2012, vied for turning Egypt into a sort of an Islamic republic. It's the same Egypt, but with an Islamic robe, with a religious logic behind that. Well, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi respects religion. He observes Islam or religion. But he won't let religion to get into the political sphere. And that's the whole story. Erdogan in Turkey versus the followers of Ataturk. What is the bone of contention? Why do they harass each other, especially Erdogan versus his oppositioners? What sort of Turkey I would like to have? Erdogan is restoring the glory of the one-time Islamic Sultanate. He is a neo-Ottomanist. And I'm using some slogans here in order just to give you an idea about the thing. And there are many in Turkey who would just rather have Turkey, which is much more similar to what the founder of modern Turkey preached for 100 years ago. He was depicted Ataturk, the father of the Turks. His name was Mustafa Kemal, but he said that religion and church, or religion and mosque, in Turkey should be separated. Didn't work. Separation between mosque, church, synagogue, and state, there's something that cannot be worked out in the Middle East. Why? Because religion is too instrumental in that part of the region. So the clever, the wiser, would work out kind of a compromise in the sense that this is the only way by which to coexist. The dummy would stick to the either-or game. And this is why many states in this region are entangled in kind of a very bloody civil war, which becomes a never-ending story. And I want you actually to have that in mind. Take, for example, the Palestinians. I was amazed to see in the world that Palestinians are being referred to by ignorance as kind of a monolith. When I asked actually people, which Palestinians are you referring to? More often than not, the response was, is there any difference? There is a war between Gaza and the West Bank, between Hamas and Fatah. What is the bone of contention? Now you know it. If and when, if at all, there would be Palestine, now it is high time for Palestinians to start fighting each other over the notion of what sort of Palestine we would like to have. In the West Bank, there are people like Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, successor of Yasser Arafat, Abu Ammar. Those people actually were educated in secular madrasas or schools, either in Moscow or Cairo or whatever. And they are still preaching for a secular Palestinian nationalism. their erstwhile enemies are ruling Gaza. They are the presenters of what I can call how we can make Palestine be wrapped up with an Islamic envelope. They are being called Hamas. Hamas, Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. Translation: this is the movement for Islamic resistance. What is Islamic resistance? Who do you resist to? What is your notion? You might find it very, very weird. But this is exactly the notion under which a Shi'i, rather than Sunni like the Hamas, but the Shi'i, Hezbollah, is working when it comes to Lebanon. Islamic resistance, chasing the wind. Now, I'm not saying that in Israel there is no rift between religionists and secularists and etc. Israel is a Middle Eastern state. This is something that Israelis should learn too, by the way. Because they are a startup nation, they are pretty sure that they are part and parcel of the West, which is not. But basically what I'm trying to say here is to find or create kind of an understanding that this is something that we have to take to the bank while entering the Middle East. Secularist versus religionist. As simple as that. Of course, there are subdivisions there. I don't have time to elaborate on that. There are secularist, traditionalist, religious or traditional religionists. I mean, we have many, many hybrids there. But there is a huge debate over the, let us say, the notion of the future vision when it comes to states and the region alike. This was not kind of a mere coincidence. This is a call, a cry from the past. And the past here, with all respect to other cultures, is a multi-layered past. We do talk about Jerusalem, Istanbul, Tehran, Isfahan, Cairo, pyramids, millennia. We do not talk centuries. It's millennia in this region. When you have that kind of a multi-layered history, you have many, many chapters or you have kind of a variety of models to follow, and you can take things actually in kind of a way. If you would like to bolster your position in the current affairs, you should adhere to a specific chapter, being wrapped up by that, and create kind of a march toward the future. Now, why the Arab Spring is so important? What the Arab Spring managed to do is to take all these fierce dictators who came up with iron fist and ran police states, دولة مخابرات in Arabic, when they actually got weaker and weaker because of the Arab Spring, states that from the beginning were artificial began shaking, with many, many subgroups which adhere to pre-state ideology Each one of them is trying to capitalize on the weakness of the state and to get kind of a totally different position for itself. So this Arab Spring, in some cases, was as if somebody, unintentionally of course, opened up the Pandora's box. This brings me to the third observation, something that I depict as primordial identities. Well, if somebody looks at the Middle East, he would, especially if he has Western lens, he would assume, and I don't blame him for that the people of Iraq are Iraqis. Let's just repeat that because this is very simplistic. If in Sweden we have Swedish, in Iraq we have Iraqis, which is partially true. The problem is that when you try to understand the creation of Iraq, for example, and I'll take Iraq for an example, because I was originating in Iraq. I was born in Israel, but my parents, grandparents, and everybody came from Baghdad and Basra. But if I would like actually to just give you an example of that, I hope that I have it here. Oh gosh, here we go. This is Iraq, okay? Again, it's a very, very broad generalization, but just to give you an idea. The green part is Shiite, the others are Sunnis. Up there, Kurds, the others are Arabs. Now let's just make sure that we understand that Kurds, Arab, Persians, and Turks are different peoples. Each one of them have its own history, very proud of itself, coming up with a huge, deep culture and legacy. Arabs, Persians, Turks, Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis. The list is very, very long. And I won't actually bother you too much about that. But I just want you to understand that beneath the states, which is, I don't know where, maybe here, okay? Not here. There are primordial identities, very ancient, which in most cases do not accept the state as the state actually are discriminating them against. And what they are trying to have is a golden opportunity by which to change the tide. In many cases, Arab Spring actually provided Shiites in Iraq, and even before, or Sunnis in Syria, a majority which had been depressed by an Alawite minority. So the state was taken in captive by pre-state identities. I'll try to put it that way in order to just make sure that it would make sense. In any case, if I'm going to advise somebody, if I'm going to write on that, if I'm going to give kind of a, let's say, an observation about Iraq, I would make sure that my listener understand that with the notion of all of them are Iraqis, he would get to nowhere. What counts is Shiite versus Sunnis, Kurds versus Arabs, Turks versus Kurds, Arabs versus Persians. Where this comes from, you know now.
I'd like to begin by laying out an agenda, because we all have a general sense that anti-Semitism in the region needs to be challenged and rolled back. But what exactly does that mean? What are its component parts, and what would it look like thematically? So I argue that there are 7 key points, and if you'll bear with me, I will share them and read them aloud. First, quite obviously, end institutionalized demonization. Cease the vilification of Israel and Jews generally through Arab establishment outlets and Iranian and jihadist information operations. Second, revive local historical memory. That is, grant Arab publics knowledge long denied them of indigenous Jewish history, Jews' contributions to the region, their dispossession and forced flight, and their living legacy in Israel, through exposure to Jews' broader historical experience, contextualize concerns about security in the face of anti-Semitism. Number 3, repair spiritual bonds. Restore awareness of the connection among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Rekindle affinity for the Jewish faith by highlighting a commonality of texts, rituals, and values. Number 4, elucidate Israel. Provide a duly corrective, multi-layered representation of the Jewish state, its history, its people, and their natural place in regional affairs. Desegregate the public discussion. That is, in an environment where Israelis have long been denied a platform, ensure the regular participation of Israelis not as foils, but as contributors in media conversations about politics and defense, education and development, health and fitness, science and technology, arts and ideas, and the range of human aspirations shared by all the region's peoples. Catalyze civil partnership. Expose Arab audiences and learners to the benefits of joint effort with Israelis and other Jews in a range of civil sectors. Draw attention to specific opportunities for cooperation. Spotlight positive outcomes as new partnerships develop. Promote Arab-Israeli friendship as a value. Foster civil communication and exchange. And finally, last but not least, expose rejectionism. Narrate and commemorate the century of damage wrought by pan-Arabist and Islamist forces through their use of anti-Semitism as a political tool. Enlist this history in exposing the rhetoric and tactics of rejectionist forces today. That agenda, in my view, if pursued successfully on a massive scale, would not change the situation overnight, but over a generation's time, from my perspective, the blink of an eye, would have the potential to make a serious dent in the public discussion and promote the conditions that would enable a peace between peoples. And again, it lies in these 3 facets. What would it look like to take advantage of the top-down opportunity? It means that those Western countries, for example, that are allied with Arab governments would begin to have a more serious discussion about the content of their communications platforms and leverage goodwill, incentives, and yes, where necessary, apply pressure in order to see an overhaul of the content of these outlets and not merely talk about this idea vaguely, but rather provide a turnkey solution. That is, instead of simply saying, as so many have, you guys need to do something about incitement on your media, actually build a team of trainers, bilingual, bicultural trainers and specialists who would be mandated to enter these institutions over a sustained period of time, train and mentor the talent that runs them, and institute monitoring and accountability to ensure that whatever commitments the leaders make are met. Structure this in a way that is, in some sense, marked by benchmarks so that there is an exchange and an understanding of mutual benefit provided that the stipulated goals are met. Bottom up means seeking out, engaging, befriending, strengthening, and empowering those grassroots actors who are not waiting for Arab governments to lead the way in promoting a new discussion about Israel and Jews. And outside in means end the problem I showed you a moment ago, where Jewish community organizations, leaders, and so on are unable to follow or respond to the torrent of anti-Semitism that their visits often trigger. I submit to you that all three of these pursuits are possible. With respect to the top-down, the broadcast I showed you of my own appearance on Al Arabiya is by no means unique. There are publications and other broadcasts controlled by various Arab powers in which some actors want to promote a new set of ideas about Israel and Jews. Here's one of them, a place I write for, Al Majalla, Saudi Arabia's flagship news magazine. This story is about an Egyptian Jew who built half of Alexandria. The lead is ask a young Egyptian what Smuha means, and he will likely tell you it is an excellent football team in Alexandria, lately ranking third in Egypt's Premier League. He may also know that the team takes its name from Smuha City, a resplendent Alexandrian suburb. So it wasn't surprising that when Richard Smuha, a Swiss national, recently submitted his passport to a man of Egyptian origin at an airport in Amsterdam, the officer asked him, "Did you know that your family was named after a place in Egypt?" But Smuha's reply surprised the officer. Actually, the place in Egypt was named after my family. The story proceeds to relate how Richard Smuha, an Iraqi Jew, moved to Alexandria in the 1920s, bought a large bit of swampland that was blocking the natural expansion of the municipality, drained it, and converted it to a British-style garden city. It became an affluent place with churches, synagogues, mosques, and cultural centers, and a large residence, and enabled Alexandria to expand substantially. He ran it for 30 years and then had it all taken away by Gamal Abdel Nasser during the period of sequestration and dispossession. It was an opportunity to tell this story to an audience that scarcely knows there even were Jews in Egypt, let alone that there were close to 1 million Jews in the space between Casablanca and Kuwait City on the eve of the Second World War, and they were dispossessed and forced to flee en masse. So I submit to you that given a spread of publications and broadcasts in which well-intentioned people do exist, if you match that with political capital brought via exchanges with Arab allies, you give them more space and more of a mandate to do much more of this type of work. With respect to the bottom-up, I think you gained a sense of how embattled these voices are, even as their numbers grow. And so I will only speak in general terms and say that nascent efforts and strategies are being developed as we speak to strengthen the hand of these figures, protect them, and connect them with one another and with friends all over the world. As I say, I'm not going to go into detail about that right now. But I will tell you about the issue of what it might look like to strengthen Jewish and Israeli capacities to engage Arab audiences in Arabic. I was given an opportunity by a small Jewish organization in San Francisco called JEMENA. It stands for Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, to build an Arabic program for the group. It's an organization that since about 2001 has been concerned with educating Americans and other Westerners who also don't know much about the Middle Eastern Jewish historical narrative, that Judaism isn't just lox and bagels and other Ashkenazi trappings, but it is a multifaceted, diverse history that spans the world, including what is today the Arabic-speaking world. So what we did is to build a multimedia platform with a dynamic website, articles, a wonderful woman who manages our correspondence on social media through 5 hours a day of very active correspondence. And it has won a following in the millions. And there is a kind of negotiation with an Arab audience that is different from the traditional negotiation of diplomats among one another. And it is an emotional negotiation. And using the Jemena platform, we have attempted to begin that process. And so I'll share with you a specimen of that effort and then tell you a little bit more about what went into it and what we did with it.
اسم القداسة على اسم جدي داود الكويتي أخو داود صالح الكويتي. الأخوان صالح وداود الكويتي هما يهوديان عراقيان ولدا في منطقة الشرق لدولة الكويت، وكانا من أهم الموسيقيين في العراق خلال ثلاثينات وأربعينات القرن الماضي. وقاما بتطوير المقامات العراقية وتقديم ألحان لكل مطربي تلك الفترة. وشكل الأخوان النواة الأولى لشكل الموسيقى العراقية التي تربت أجيال مختلفة على أصالتها وأنغامها.
اللابس الوردي والما يغنوا لها غنيت أنا بوحدي.
هو الأغنية العراقية. هو الأغنية العراقية. لون الأغنية العراقية الأربعينية والخمسينية والخمسينية. هنا في إسرائيل حيث ولد ويعيش حفيد داود الكويتي يجدد المغني الشاب دودو تاسا يرث إبداعات أجداده من الطرب الأصيل لأجيال معاصرة وقادمة. عندما يغني دودو حول العالم تسأله الجماهير المحبة متى ستغني في الكويت والعراق؟ متى ستزور موطن أجدادك وتذكر الأجيال الجديدة بالأخوين داود وصالح الكويتي؟ وجواب دودو لهم هو: أشكركم يا إخواني في الكويت والعراق على دعمكم للموسيقى مالتي ومال أجدادي. والله هذا أكبر حلم. أتمنى أجي يوم ونغني سوا مثل أيام زمان الحلوة. ممكن تساعدوني نحول أنا الحلم إلى حقيقة. تخيلوا المنظر. أعزائي المشاهدين، دعونا نستمد الإلهام من ماضي الزمن الجميل لرسم مسار أكثر إشراقاً للمستقبل.
So, to give this a little bit of context, the word normalization is often used to describe the process we're talking about. I don't like the word because it presumes that that relations between Arabs and Jews, and Israelis are not normal, and it's like the creation of a forced normal. But indeed, what is more normal than a young man who loves to sing and comes from a family of singers, learning the language of his ancestors and wanting to reconnect in person and on stage with the country of his ancestors? And who will stand in the way of that, claiming that such a desire is in any way inauthentic or inappropriate? It is simply an inherent human right. And the thing about taking a step in a new kind of journey that might be a little controversial or scary at first is that when you do move forward, you find that there are people along the way who come out of every place you could imagine and say, we want to help. So we brought this video to a gentleman named Alberto Fernandez, who heads Al Hurra, the pan-Arab television channel controlled by the United States. We said, Alberto, would you be willing to air this clip on your channel? And he said, Joseph, not only am I going to, let me tell you something, this kind of work is exactly why our channel was set up. This is what we're meant to do. And not only will we air your little clip, but we're going to create an hour of television built around the story of Dudu Tassa, and we're going to air it over and over again. And that included the opportunity for me to sort of accentuate the implications of the video you just saw in a little clip as well.
أنا نفسي من أحفاد جيل المهجرين من اليهود العراقيين، ونحن نفرح عندما نسمع عن عراقيين في الداخل يهتموا فينا، يهتموا في إعادة بناء الجسور معنا. عسى أن نتعاون على جميع المجالات ويكون هناك إعادة بناء الفسيفساء العراقية التي كانت القوة العراقية دائما نبعت من التنوع.
Earlier in this little presentation, you saw a rather unpleasant opinion poll. We did our own opinion poll after the Al Hurra broadcasts and our own social media activity on the story of Dudu's dream. We asked our audience, do you support Dudu Tassa's right to perform in the lands of his ancestors? The response was 71% in favor and 29% against. We know that such an outcome would have been unimaginable a generation ago, particularly in light of the fact that Facebook is an application where if you want to participate in an opinion poll, you have to you expose the audience to your name and photograph and so on. So everyone on that 71% who voted in favor of Dudu performing in Iraq and Kuwait, one can identify who they are and where they live and so on. And so we consider that a real step forward. And furthermore, our friends, the more active friends on social media, now numbering over 60,000 for Jemena, include people who are taking this message on their own, in their own hands, into their own communities. So for example, a Libyan professor of literature approached us and asked, he lives in Tripoli, do you know of any Jewish Libyan poets? And we reached out in the community and indeed discovered there was someone named Bouhleyqa who wrote a lot of poetry that was well liked in the early 20th century and then fled after the massacres of 1967. We got a hold of the stuff, we sent it to this gentleman, and he proceeded to teach it in his poetry class. There was a young Algerian who has been sort of consuming the content we produce every day for quite some time. And one Friday, when he went to his mosque in Algiers, a preacher delivered a predictably stem-winding, blood-curdling sermon about Jews. And he stood up and confronted him with some of the things he had learned on the Jemena site. Preacher was very angry, and there was an altercation and police were called in. But it speaks to the fact that people get fired up and they speak out. And so the more of this you do, the more of an impact you have. And one of the things we're especially proud of is the fact that, perhaps motivated by our content and the videos we have created, some of our followers are creating their own videos and sending them to us. Here is an example. It was created by a young Tunisian who knew that a Tunisian Jewish woman who had fled 40 years ago was coming back to visit her village in the southern part of the country, and was going to look for old friends whom she had left behind, predominantly Muslim ones, of course. And here is the moment when she found a very close friend from her childhood. I think that the video in its own way kind of says it all. It did go viral. Millions of people have seen it. It's been written up in Tunisian publications and beyond, in Algeria, Morocco, and so on. Who will stand in the way of these two women reuniting? Who will justify their forced separation for 4 decades? These questions have obvious answers, and if you are serious, systematic, and methodical about presenting the truth to a mass audience, we believe that smart people, who are the majority of people in every Arab country, will find their way. So that is pretty much what I was asked to share with you today. Thanks again for your interest, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be delighted to respond.
Here is the thing. You know, the Iranians were conducting the manners in the Middle East. They dictated the rhythm. It was for them, John Kerry and Obama was a breakfast for them. They are very shrewd. Yeah. The best diplomats you have ever had. I also warn my Israeli fellow men, don't underestimate them. The whole West, with its almighty technologies, cannot challenge them around the table. This is why they would like you actually to get back there. They're going to just actually got what they want there. Trump, the problem with Trump, when the Iranians are viewing things is, hey, who is that guy? Somebody could tell us what this guy had between his ears. I mean, they ask themselves. Now, he says, oh, you just did a very dangerous thing. You're gonna pay the price. You know, for the Ayatollahs, this is taken seriously because they don't know whether this is something which is façon de parler or something that heralds a new thing here. So the simple fact that they don't understand the West as kind of a taken for granted or a naivete, Trump is coming up with kind of a businessman thing here. And you know, he's doing things that everybody is being bewildered by. In Jerusalem, in Erwa, he takes the money from all those who got American money without a reward for the Americans. So he just, you know, it's like a company. What did you do with my money? Show me. And then he found that an agency that was given 120 million a year, half of it was channeled, I don't know if you know that, for salaries in Gaza for people who ran Gaza on behalf of the Hamas. Some of them were saboteurs. You know, he just said, listen, if that is the case, no money. Go to the Europeans. Excellent. Take money from them. Just like that. Now, if you are a Middle Easterner, you say, hey, what is that? The West is giving money without criticism. where this guy is so rude to ask us, what did we do with his money? This is unprecedented. Just like that. So, you see, I mean, there is a difference. Yes, please.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I would hope that the current administration is doing its due diligence and understanding the root problems, the history, the cultural dynamics that are at the root of the issue. But that's really what I was getting. I was hoping.
You know, Bahrain is kind of an economic bomb of would-be, hopefully, kind of. It has nothing to do with the peace agreement in the Middle East. You know, people would like to do business, and Saudis, Emiratis, Bahrainis are trying to do things beneath the radar with Israel and others, and that's the thing.
But so you mentioned Iran, and to that point, I'm curious as to whether, and I mentioned this to you earlier, I'm curious as to whether you believe that this functional alliance model based upon the premise of my enemy's enemy being my friend, whether you think that's sustainable given that it's not unforeseeable that you could have a political regime
Nothing
shift where
is
the
sustainable.
Ayatollahs- yeah.
No. Listen, you know, that's nothing is sustainable. It's a functional alliance. You have to be aware. And if you snooze, you lose. And you can hope that Ayatollahs can be ousted by, I just have to remind you, they are very cruel, very cruel. They don't have any other place to go. They know exactly what they're going to get if there is an Iranian spring them there. And they have their own mercenaries. It is called Basij in Persian. They are just slaughtering people in the streets, when they are protesting against the regime. I can show you that. We know that. They are very cruel, like the Hamas in Gaza. What counts for them is their politics of survival, not the people. They took the money and channeled it to Yemen, Hezbollah, Syria. Why? Why won't you channel the money to your people? And their people know that. Now, if you ask me if they are able to have kind of a coup d'etat or kind of a revolution, it's very difficult. There is no opposition in Iran. Yes, please.
Also, just a few quick points, mostly pertaining to some things we discussed and saw in the earlier session. Number one, you talked about you have some students at university who do nothing but sort of patrol the internet for language, anti-Semitic language, videos, what have you. I appreciated that because it belies an understanding that social media.
That's because culture matters. Culture matters.
Correct.
Without culture, you
Social
cannot
media
understand
and the
the
internet are being used as
Yeah.
weapons for anti-Semitism, so I appreciated that. I had a question that sprang from the video that you actually showed, Charles.
Yeah.
While I have my sort of generalistic nitpicks about the balance of the video, I think it was great that they did an expose showing all of this, highly inflammatory language in these mosques. There wasn't really a whole lot of balance in terms of some of the things being done by local groups, organizations, people, free thinkers who oppose that kind of thing, but that's nitpicking. My question that came from it was when we talked about the protections of free speech afforded to these people to be able to say these despicable things. And I thought about hate crime laws, right? I'm not a lawyer, but I thought about hate crime laws and how they are supposed to protect people who, religious groups, genders, whatever, from acts of violence, but it doesn't protect people from inciting acts of violence, right? And I've been talking to some of my colleagues about that. And I wondered what would happen if the Klan in the American South got together and held a public rally and said, we're going to talk about killing all the blacks or killing all the women or what have you. And the last thing, the thing that I really thought about, I did a little bit of coverage of the worst massacre of Jews in the U.S., the Tree of Life Synagogue, 11 people murdered, obviously. And the shooter very willingly said that he was motivated by the belief of that all Jews needed to be killed. He was actually spewing this stuff on a social media network. called ISGAP that called itself the place for free speech. So I'm just wondering how some of this, the protection of free speech under the First Amendment might need to be, we might.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to respond very quickly. Let me respond. The reason why I think Zvi Eshkeli's work on the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, not Islam and not Muslims, is so vital is the absolute illiteracy that we have as a society of the threat that it poses. So this was indicative of Muslim Brotherhood ideology. So it's not a question, it's not looking at the Muslim community. It's a diverse community that is vastly law-abiding and decent, but there's a reactionary political movement in the United States now and needs to be understood. So it's not a question of balancing. If you're looking at the Ku Klux Klan, you're looking at the Ku Klux Klan. We're looking at a reactionary social movement that is out to exterminate Jews and to destroy democracy. There's actually a person here, I don't want to say who the person is, who was involved in helping to establish a mosque somewhere in the United States, and there was a coalition of Christians and Jews who helped to welcome the mosque into their community. And this person walked out of the room crying because they helped to establish the mosque, and he or she recognized the preacher saying these horrible things about killing Jews that they helped to welcome into their community. So we need to become literate and make the distinction between political Islam and decent Muslim Americans who are living peacefully according to the law. And I think we need to become literate on that. So I think it's essential that we.
And I would
Just one thing. We are living in a world of fake news, okay? What we have to be is keenly aware how dangerous is that. I mean, we have 2 billion Muslims. Most of them are great. Just thinking of themselves as human beings like you and me.